Hello and welcome back to my channel, The Jellyfish Journals. My name is Susie and today I am going to show you how I update my journal for all of my reading in March. So the first thing I'm doing is updating my library card. These are for books that I've loaned out to different people, and on the back I have my swatch chart so that everything I do on these beginning pages for 2025 in my reading journal will all be with the same colors. And it's just kind of like a easy way to make sure that the theme stays themey and everything stays cohesive on all of the yearly tracker pages that I do. So on this page, these are the 25 books that I definitely wanted to get to in 2025. And so you can see here I am filling in Sunrise on the Reaping. I will say the Tombow markers, especially the darker colors, if you layer over them a few times, they do come out kind of stripy. And so sometimes I just go with it. So for the Sunrise on the Reaping title, I just went ahead and did some horizontal stripes. But you can see the Snow Child, it doesn't show up as easily. And so in December, oh my goodness, December, listen to me guys. So in March, I did read 3 books off this list. I read Sunrise on the Reaping, I read The Snow Child, and then I read Room. And I'm just adding some little vertical stripes to the cover of Room just to make it a little more interesting. And on to my reading log. I read 12 books in March, and so all I'm going to do on this page is write down the title of the book, the author of the book, and what I rated it. And I pretty much base my ratings just on how the book made me feel. I know there are really complicated rating systems out there, and some obviously that are not so complicated. For me, I just do solid stars, so no half stars or quarter stars or whatever. And for me, a 5-star book is something that was incredibly memorable, something I am happy and proud to have on my bookshelf, and something that I would be highly likely to recommend or talk about with somebody. And then I just kind of go down from there. Most books I read tend to be about 4 stars. A 3-star book is a book I did enjoy, but might not be as inclined to recommend or might not remember it very well. This was a very satisfying day in my reading log because, as you are going to see, I finally get to start the next column in my reading log. And there's just something kind of fun about that, something kind of satisfying. Like, hey, I've been reading and I've got to document all these books. I also do log the books in the order that I read them. I don't mark down audio, print, or digital here. You'll see where I do that a little bit later in the reading journal. The next page is for my reading challenge, and these books I already had printed and so in color, and so I just store them in a little pocket in the back of my notebook, and it's easier to glue on that way when I'm done. Now I'm gluing my book bracket winner, which was The Snow Child for March. I debated making my winner Sunrise on the Reaping. I don't know, something about that just felt a little unfair to me. It's hard to read Sunrise on the Reaping as its own isolated book because it is so intertwined with the other stories. So I did let Snow Child have the book bracket win for the month of March. As I said before, I did read 12 books in March, so you can see I logged that on the chart on the left. And I believe I read 4,167 pages, and so I'm adding that to the tracker on the right. Moving along, this chart is for the dates that I finished a book, and I was only able to get through 1 digital book in the entire month of March. It's tricky for me to get to digital books. Typically, I focus on my print books, and then what I do is once I'm ready to turn off the light at the end of the day, I read a little bit of my digital, whatever's on my Kindle, and then I tend to pass out. So I don't get very far in those, and they tend to take a little bit longer to read. You are about to see a big chunk of the month where I finished a lot of books. That was during spring break. So I teach third grade, and I was able to get a lot of reading finished during spring break, including Sunrise on the Reaping, which I pretty much set aside the entire release day to just dive in and read that book, and I was able to finish it in one day. This tracker, I'm really just kind of curious what it ends up looking like at the end of the year, if there's any trends, if there's anything that stands out. For example, I think spring break is going to stand out as a time when I definitely finished a bunch of books a few days consecutively. Now on to my year published chart. And this is just kind of a garden of flowers. I think I drew 170 something flowers or floral bits. And then there's a code up in the top right that coordinates with a span of years that the book could have been published in. Most of what I read in March was on the newer end. So pretty much everything I read in March was published after, I want to say, the year 2010. So I think I had about 7 books that were published after 2020, or in 2020 and beyond. And I think I had 5 books that were published between 2010 and 2019. So not a lot of color added besides those 2 colors to the chart, which, to be honest, I did anticipate that by the end of the year there will be a lot more of those colors in this little garden of flowers. I do have some older classics by Jane Austen I'm planning to get to this year, and some other classics that were published a bit further back. So hopefully those colors will get added in there before too long. And I think what I'll probably do is try to make them some of the larger flowers so those colors still get a little nod. All right, onto my bookshelfie, which is probably my very favorite spread. And all you're going to see me doing here is just kind of tracking shelf by shelf. These are for my physical TBR books that I currently own on my bookshelf in my house. And you're just going to see me kind of going book by book, and they've already got the titles written on them. I like to do that in advance when I set up my spread for the year. And then as the year goes on and I read a book, I just color it with one of those predetermined colors on my swatch chart. There's really no rhyme or reason. The colors don't stand for anything in particular. I just love the look at the end of the year when the bookshelf is filled in with all of these spines that match the colors in all of the other spreads. So you will notice I am not coloring 12 books. Oh, I think on that point I realized I missed a book a month prior, The Only One Left by Riley Sager, which I did read in February. Another quick note, apparently I never uploaded my update from February. So I did do that update, at least, golly, I think I did. Now I'm a little nervous that maybe I didn't. I'm pretty sure I did. So I did update all of this, including February's reads, but I was sure I posted that video and I guess I didn't. I'm not likely to go back and do that. So if it looks like there was a big jump from January to now, that's all that is. Pretty sure I recorded it. I guess I just completely forgot to post it once I was done. So right now I am adding genres read and new books that I purchased and where I purchased them from. I did decide that I was going to add dystopian underneath fantasy. I read the book Red Rising in March, and it's kind of sci-fi in my head. It's in space, but it's classified as a dystopian. I think there's going to be something else I'm going to have to do the same way this year later. I did read a horror so far in April, So I'm going to have to figure out where to put that in the chart. And I guess that's something to note for next year, that I might need a few more genres on my genres read. So just to make that a little more accurate, I guess. All right, documented the new books that I acquired in March, and now it is time to head to my yearly stats for each month. And this is just one chart that is going to document all of the numbers for each month so that I can look at everything in one place. And so I read 12 books in the month of March, which is exactly what I read in February. 4,167 pages, so a little bit more than I read in February. 7 of those books were print. I know one of those books was digital, and then 4 of those books were audio. I did acquire quite a lot of new books. I think the number is 19. But in my defense, as I said before, I did have spring break in March, and a couple of my best local book friends that I like to go book shopping with both wanted to get together that week. Also, Sunrise on the Reaping came out, and I found myself at Barnes & Noble, which is not somewhere I normally tend to go when I'm looking for books. And so I did acquire quite a lot of books, and that's the little note I made to myself there, was that spring break equals book shopping, apparently. And I am just going to have to keep in mind that with all those books I acquired, I might need to start behaving myself a little bit more this year. For my A to Z challenge, I'm adding 3 books. I'm adding Room by Emma Donoghue. And then I'm going to add, I believe it's called Drop Dead Sisters for the letter D. And that was that was the only digital book that I read in March. And then I'm going to add, of course, Sunrise on the Reaping for S. I really want that book to pop up everywhere I can possibly think of. Although now that I think about it, coming up on my rainbow challenge, I think I meant to put that down for purple, and I don't think I did. So I might have to go correct that later, because the cover is very purple. All right. If you see me doing some rubbing like that, it's just a little bit of the glue stick glue. If you rub it a bit, it tends to come off and it's not tacky anymore. For my Read the World spread, I read a few books in some different places, which is always fun. I read a book that took place in England. Then there was The Snow Child, which took place in Alaska. One of the books I read was The Wild Girls, and that took place in Botswana. So I believe, nope, not my first country in Africa, but it is kind of neat to have one down there at the bottom now. And then 3 of the books were in U.S. states. So we have Iowa, Colorado, and New Jersey. And so that's going to take up all of my reading around the world for March. Just those little places there. I need to read something in Australia, apparently. Moving on to my book bingo, I was able to fill in a book that was recommended by a teacher. That was Red Rising, a book with a 1-word title, Room, and then a book with a title of 5 or more words, and that would be The Source of All Things, which was a memoir I read. So just like always, I wrote the titles of those books in the appropriate boxes, and I just outlined them with one of those Tombow markers on my swatch chart, just so that it'll be a little easier at the end of the year to see where bingos happened. For my Read the Rainbow spread, I am still not sure that I like The Alchemist for my orange. And so I was trying out Wild Girls, but my husband took a look at it and said Alchemist was more orange than Wild Girls, so I ended up leaving that. I did not love The Witch Collector, but it was decidedly more blue than the cover that had been there, so I glued over the old cover. And The Snow Child was very suited for a gray covered book. Probably will still go back and change Bee Sting for a white cover. That was a quick flip, but I did check off that I had read Red Rising on my recommendations. And then for thriller tropes, I did have two more books that I could fill in here. I will not say much more about that in case I end up spoiling something for anybody. No more classics, no books that I did not finish, and so on to my new book log. And this is pretty much where I just told my husband to turn his head and not watch me fill this out. He was sitting on the couch next to me, and he would glance over, and I got a few from him because it was quite a haul month. So I ended up going to a secondhand store called Second and Charles. I ended up going there twice because two different book friends wanted to go. Our library system in my county has a little shop also where they sell used books, and so we were able to pop by there one of the days. Let's see, my school, one of the teachers at my school set up a little free library in our teacher's lounge, and so it just so happened a couple of really good books I'd had my eye on popped up in there also. Not to mention, on my walks, I found a couple other books at little free libraries. And then, like I said, when I went to purchase Sunrise on the Reaping, I went to the Barnes & Noble release night party they did. So we were able to get it at 10 o'clock at night here in Colorado because that's midnight on the East Coast. So I went to that, but the book friend that was supposed to go with me, she is pregnant and was not feeling well. And so I ended up going by myself, which was fine, except, Hunger Games is a YA series. And so a lot of the people that were there were quite a bit younger than me and brought a lot of friends with them. And so I kind of wandered the store by myself for a while, which was fine. I definitely don't mind wandering by myself, but it just meant that as I was roaming the store, I fell in love with 3 other books besides Sunrise on the Reaping, which I came for. And I texted my husband and told him I was sad and lonely, and he was out of town at the time, and I think he was also kind of lonely. And so he was like, buy the books. And so 4 of these books are his fault. That's all I'm going to say about that. But definitely excited to read some of the books that I purchased there. But mostly I try to stick to secondhand stores and little free libraries. I just think you get a better deal at those places than you do at a bookstore. But don't get me wrong, I really do love shopping at Barnes & Noble when I'm able to do that. So that finishes out my new books list, and I will be turning the page on that chart much sooner than I had originally anticipated. And now we're going to move on to my March reading journal pages. And again, a little frustrated. I don't know what happened with February, but que sera, right? So first, for my March spread, we're going to color in the books that I read in March. These were originally it was 5 books, and I was kind of kicking myself in the tush because when I originally created this spread, I had completely forgotten to include Sunrise on the Reaping, which was the book I was most excited about for 2025. So you can see I kind of squeezed it in there next to Broom before I made this video, and happily was able to get it in. So normally I don't have 6 books on my up next spread, but that's what happened for this one. So anyway, this spread is basically just what are the books I'm really hoping to get to in this month. And what I usually do is I kind of look at my shelf, I look at which books are kind of jumping out at me. If I've read a lot of thrillers lately, maybe I try to break it up with something different. Have I heard a lot about a book recently and it's going to drive me crazy until I am able to sit down and read it? I just kind of pull out what are 5 books, because normally it's 5, that I am just ready to get to, and I'm ready to knock off my TBR. So I don't think it through too far in advance. I really only think about it when I'm setting up this spread. It also does include my book challenge book for the month, which for this month was The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin. And so you can see that's the one I'm coloring now. And just a handful of others. For March, I decided on a thriller, The Overnight Guest, a memoir, which is The Source of All Things. I have been really itching to read The Snow Child, and so I didn't want to wait any longer for that, especially because there's something about reading a book about winter and the snow, and it's snowing outside where you live. And then, of course, Room, which I'd just been really anxious to get to. And when Sunrise on the Reaping came out, squeezed that in there, like I said before. So I was able to get through all of these books on my up next list, and I'm just coloring them all in different ways so that mini little bookshelf looks all finished and colored in. Then up next, I have a page for that month's reading challenge that I am going through on STORYGRAPH, the app. And for the month of March, it was to read a standalone book. And I think I said this when I did the first video for March, but most of my books tend to be standalone books. But this one, I believe I had gotten in a little free library, and it had been on my TBR for a while, so I decided this will be a great time to get through it. I wasn't super impressed with the book. I loved the premise of the book, but it just didn't grab me as much as other books have in the past. So this book did end up being a 3-star book for me, and I just made a little note of that at the top of the page there. And up next, we have the page for the new books I acquired. And again, just a little embarrassed here that my number was 19. Actually, I'm almost a little bummed I didn't just get one more and make it an even 20. I mean, if you're going to go big, right? Normally, I think, actually, I'll be honest, I don't know if there has been a normally. I know I'm only 3 months into the year, but I have also added authors on here, but because I had so many books, I knew I was not going to have any room to write the authors' names. So right now I am just writing the title of each book with a little black bullet point dot between each title, and I am just doing my best to fit it all in there neatly. And you're going to see it still was not enough room, and so I add a little bit extra of those purple lines at the bottom. Oh, I just realized too, another thing that had happened was I'd earned a reward at Second and Charles, our secondhand bookstore. And when my husband and I went to go redeem it, it turned out they were doing their penny a page sale. And so that's how I ended up getting 3 more books at the end of the month. So yeah, it was just one of those months where it just kind of kept happening, I guess. Up next are my top 3 reads for March, and those were Sunrise on the Reaping, of course, The Snow Child, which was my top read for March, if you recall, and The Overnight Guest. And all 3 of these books were 5 stars. I did have other 5-star books in March, but these were my favorites. Sunrise on the Reaping, like I said before, I think is probably going to be my top read of the entire year, but it just seems kind of unfair to pit it against other standalone books when part of what made Sunrise on the Reaping so phenomenal, in my opinion, was the connection to the rest of the series and the fact that I already knew the characters and loved the characters. And so I have a feeling I'm going to find a way to honor that book somewhere in my reading journal, but it definitely got a nod as a top read for the month. On this page, I am just recording the monthly stats, kind of similarly to what you saw earlier in this video on the kind of annual stats page where I record each month's stats. This is just where I record it for the month of March because these are my monthly or my March pages. So on these pages, I record the same things every month. So that's pages read, the number of books read, the number of books I did not finish, how many physical, digital, and audio books that I read that month, and how many new books I acquired that month. And I mean, there's definitely other stats that I could record for this, but really, this just seems to be the things that I'm most interested in monthly. I I don't know. It's just kind of another fun page to do, really. I mean, I have this multiple places in my notebook, in my journal, but it's just kind of a fun way if I just wanted to look at how I did in March. It's just kind of a fun way. And I think my Papermate flare was starting to run out, so you'll see I keep going back to touch things up. And then finally, on to the books that I read. This is where I will glue down the covers of the books in the order that I read them in March. And this is where I will document how many stars I gave each book, as well as the format I read the book in. So whether the book was print, digital, or audio. I will say the biggest regret I have on this page is the Tombow marker I used, I thought was a pretty dark color, and it ended up not being super dark. So kind of wishing I had written the format and the star rating with maybe just the black Papermate flare. I also have not, and I don't know why I've struggled with this every month, but I have just struggled with the spacing of this page. I had the same problem in January and February. I think in April I gave myself a little bit more room, which is kind of cool. But you'll see in a minute. So first of all, some of those book covers are dipping up into that washi tape, which is fine. It really is, but I just kind of like the washi tape to show a bit more. You'll notice that bottom row of books, there's a huge white gap at the bottom, and I don't know why I did that. I did not need that much space. It's also possible at this point I was trying to hurry up. I probably had to pick up my daughter from somewhere, or we were about to go somewhere. Actually, now that I think about it, we were going to Saturday night Easter service, and so I might have been just trying to get all of this down. So note to self, just it's worth it to pause and come back to it to space it out a little better. But in the end, I really don't care that much. This is for me, and I really just love seeing all the covers in one place. So just tacking down some of those corners that didn't quite get glued down properly. And you'll see I'm rubbing off that excess glue like I talked about. I have had a couple people ask me about the Elmer's glue stick. It's phenomenal in my opinion. I always buy the one that's purple. Just it's a little easier to see where the glue got if it's, gotten on the page somewhere or whatever. It's a little easier to see it before it dries, to do that rubbing to get it off. But I've been very happy. Pretty much everything you see here is glued down with an Elmer's glue stick. Sometimes even the washi tape will lift a little bit because, it's removable, so it's not as strong of an adhesive. And sometimes I even use the glue stick to glue down washi tape. Anyway, you can see what I mean here, where I have had to go over and over and over what I've written with this Tombow marker because it's just not that dark. And I wish it was a little darker. I think I was trying to keep the color a little more fun, but just in retrospect, I think next month I will test that a little bit better, or just go ahead and use Papermate flare for that instead, even if it's not a black Papermate. And that's about it. Thanks for watching. Bye.